In my opinion, in 20 years, we're going to have more players swinging like this than we will planar.
Right.
Because the speed and height advantages of shallowing that out and the inability to hit it left make it very attractive for top players who obviously don't want to hook it.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Absolutely delighted to have another video with our great friend Scott Cowx. We've done some good work. We've talked a lot about some shots that are really hurting people within their game, Cowx, how we can set them up for success, some concepts around setting the body up. Today I want to dive into a topic that I think has been the biggest buzz term in sort of instruction. You can't flick through Instagram without seeing someone talking about you got to shallow and all that sort of stuff. I think George Gankis, you know, made the kind of term really, really popular, and seeing what his players do when, especially when they were playing great, has made a lot of people think, like, I've got to do that. I've got to get more shallow into my swing. I'd love to talk today a little bit about why you should, and maybe also about why you shouldn't.
Yeah, and you know, George is a good friend, and you know, he builds some really great swings, and he's obviously a heck of an instructor, and you know, we all have our preferences a little bit and our biases a little bit, and the shallowing one, to a certain extent, makes a little bit of sense in a lot of ways, because nothing's changed the game of golf instruction more than the golf ball itself.
Right.
So in 2001, when Pro V1 basically came out, all of a sudden we're dealing with spin rates that were somewhat about 2/3 of what the old Balata golf balls were doing. Yeah. So we used to try and hit down on these. If we took some of the data, you know, preliminary data from back then with the Balata golf ball, often you had a persimmon driver way back when, 13 degrees, hitting about 3 degrees down on the golf ball, launching the ball at about 7 degrees with a little bit of a rise to it. Awesome. It was a very cool looking golf shot. We now know that it's a horrible way to drive a golf ball with low launch, high spin. Right? Nowadays, we're obviously preaching mostly high launch, low spin. So when the shaft pitch is a little bit steeper, in generally, we're going to create a slightly higher swing plane, which contributes to perhaps a little bit more friction or a little bit more spin. The only way to sort of hit up on that a little bit would be either to tilt or perhaps to kind of scoop out a little bit. So when players are shallowing this a little bit down toward the trail forearm on the way down, this allows the player to pivot a little bit more, maybe have a little bit less wrist action through the golf ball. Perhaps the, you know, let's say our exits, if you will, on the target side are a little bit cleaner because of that shallowing mechanism. So we're utilizing the pivot to do much of the work. The steeper the shaft gets, the more the player has to rely on their hands. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we look at players like a Adam Scott or even Scotty Scheffler, who are quite steep, if you will. Yeah. Both of them hit the ball very high, very far. So it's not the only thing that we can do.
Right.
Okay. But that is kind of all the rage right now, and there are some physical and some mechanical advantages, perhaps, to some of that. So we're going to talk a little bit today on a couple of ways that we could have the club be a little bit shallower. Yeah. And you know, some of the ways that we can perhaps drill this in.
Love that. Okay, let's set that up.
So one of the things I think, Ian, that we want to track on the TrackMan here is our swing plane data. Yep. Okay, so this is a measurement on TrackMan from about knee height, impact, and knee height on the follow-through side. If I trace a line through those 3 points, we get a plane of motion of basically the sweet spot of the golf club. Right. And that's a very useful thing to track when we're looking at shallowing this thing. Now, there is a correlation to the shaft angle and the dynamic lie of the golf club as well, but we can actually move those a little bit independently of each other too, okay? So I like to deal with swing plane. Yep. So that last shot, just a stock, you know, kind of little chippy iron there, had a swing plane sitting around 60 degrees or so. Yep. Okay. PGA Tour average at a 5'11" male is around 57, 58. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes, depending on the club specs, depending on your height, depending on the length of your arms, depending on your posture, all these things will have some effects. Right. But if we hit maybe one more, we'll just kind of have a sample size of 2 here, not very large, but we'll see what the second one is in terms of the swing plane.
Yeah, and I would historically, Cowxy, be very sort of high vertical swing plane. I would typically be handle raiser for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about in the other videos in terms of the sort of things that cause a little bit of that scooping in the swing. And this has been something that's been a hot topic for me as I've improved my backswing a little bit. I still have a little bit, so I've got a better position at the top of the swing, but I still have a little bit of those residual tendencies just to sort of, steepen that shaft on the way down. So I'm personally really keen to see what we get in this one.
Okay, swing plane 58. Again, by the way, this correlates a little bit too as you warm up.
Yeah.
As you warm up and your body's a little more pliable, and you can create a little bit more turn going back, perhaps a little more turn coming through, generally swing plane value comes down.
Right.
Okay. As we get stiff, our hips aren't moving very well, back's a little tight, we start operating the swing a little bit more around the arms and the hands, a lot of times we still swing plane go up.
Right.
Okay. So this is one of the metrics with my tour players that we keep very close attention to, is what is their normal swing plane numbers on every club in the bag. And from there, we can see things very quickly. They might even still be hitting it okay, but when those swing plane values are changing, that's changing the timing of the swing, it's changing the angle of attack, it's changing a little bit of the face-to-path relationship. So that's a very important metric. We see that the best players in the world with swing plane kind of control that plus or minus about 1.5 degrees.
Right.
Okay, shot to shot to shot, okay, on a stock, particular shot. So when we talk about perhaps shallowing this down a little bit, okay, so if we go ahead and bring that back again, essentially what we're doing to try and get the club or the center of mass of the club or the sweet spot of the club, however we want to reference this, but we're going to try and get this more perpendicular to your spine.
Okay.
And so when we bring the club back, the thing that causes us all grief is the fact that our trail elbow is bending and causing this club to lift. Now, the rate that I bring this thing down is going to change a little bit of what that swing plane looks like, okay? So I want to make sure that people aren't confused, though, because the true term of shallowing would be the change in the shaft pitch. So this is what shallowing is. This is what lowering is. Now, they have similar tasks, but they are very, very different, okay? So I can take this, I can lower this down, okay, in some manner, whether I throw it, what we call ulnar deviated this way, whether I straighten my right arm a little bit. This is lowering the golf club. And sometimes that's a very useful idea as well, but we're gonna talk about shallowing, okay? So when we look at this motion, as we shallow, we see that the inside of the trail form is what we call supinating or opening up. Often the combination of that is there's some external rotation in the trail shoulder, and the lead shoulder is generally going from slightly almost externally rotated at the top of the swing. Now it starts to move internal on the way down. So all of those mechanisms can be utilized to get the shaft pitch to shallow out. That positions the sweet spot more perpendicular to the spine, which contributes this more to a rotary or a pivot-driven release. As you drive the pivot more, we slow down the overtaking of the shaft, okay? So a lot of times, non-planar players, as I call them, or players that are shallowing quite excessively, it's not that they can't hook it, but they generally are fade players because they're slowing this down, so the squaring mechanism becomes more about the pivot, less about the hands, okay? Now, if I take you halfway back, and a common fault that we'll see, and even in the past, Ian's maybe had some of this as well, where the shaft wants to steepen. Now, the problem is when the shaft steepens, now that sweet spot's no longer perpendicular to the spine, it starts to get almost parallel to the spine. So a good player that feels that is immediately going to stand up and tilt and try and throw the sweet spot back behind them, okay? The bad player from that position just keeps going, and now we're Charles Barkley, right? Poor Charles, okay? So if we understand that we need to get this more perpendicular to the spine, we can use several mechanisms. My personal favorite is actually to utilize the lead arm a little bit, okay? So we're gonna feel a little bit like your elbow crosses your midline, okay? We're gonna feel this elbow cross the midline. You're almost gonna feel palm up with your left hand at that point, okay? But then transitionally, what you're gonna feel is you're gonna feel this whole bicep actually work this way, okay? And it's gonna internally rotate. So I just want you to rehearse that for the camera. Okay. So we're gonna feel the elbow kind of screwing under slightly, okay? And then we're gonna turn it the opposite direction. Excellent, okay? So one of the drills I have players do if they're trying to build this, I call this the egg drill. So we're gonna imagine this ball's an egg. I'm gonna hold it open in my palm. I'm gonna bring this up to the top of my swing without dropping the egg. But then I'm gonna drop the egg and come down. Yeah. And now I get that feel of external to internal, okay? So let's rehearse that maybe with the club, that feel, but have no stops. Okay, so we're gonna feel external on the way back, internal on the way down.
Wow.
Right? Now, that's gonna feel very, very sloppy and kind of spaghetti-like, you know, relative to perhaps your normal, slightly more planar mechanics, okay? Excellent. But you notice as the club falls behind you, your response to that is to turn.
Yeah,
is to drive the pivot.
Which is what I'm so guilty of not doing. Enough of getting stuck, stalled. And the one shot I hate is that one.
Right.
I can play with some amount of curvature and dial that back. When I start getting the ball going that way, I'm stuck for the day.
Right, absolutely.
That's the tough one.
Now, the matchup to this is generally we need a fairly strong grip because as the club pitch is changing and falling behind us, technically the face is opening relative to the target line.
Got it.
So generally we see non-planar players with fairly closed club faces, if you want to call it that, on the way back. But by the time they get halfway down, it's no longer closed because the club has pitched out the appropriate amount. Okay. So let's hit a soft one here, okay? But have no stops, but let's see how we do with this and what the resultant swing plane value is going to look like. Awesome. So we went from 58 to 60 on that swing plane value, down to 55.8. Now, in my estimation, I really believe that Ben Hogan's secret to not ever hooking the golf ball was in the swing plane value. Right. The estimation on Ben Hogan's swing plane value was 51 degrees with a 7-iron, okay? So the more rotary I make this, or the more that sweet spot gets perpendicular to my spine, that's enabling you to keep turning the corner very hard, which then slows down what we call the overtaking of the shaft.
And there you can see why, exactly to your point about why a stronger grip favors this type of motion.
Correct.
Because too much of sort of that, or certainly the shallow piece, you'll just be blocking them all day if you have too much, or a bad matchup.
And this is a great pattern for players that maybe never want to see the ball go left. Yeah. Okay, for sure. So let's do that again. And I want you to turn so hard on this one. We're going to try and get our path in back to pretty close to 0. Got it. Okay. So a little bit stronger grip. We're going to see that same external lead arm on the way back. We're almost going to feel like we screw it backwards. And then we're feeling that motion internal. Okay. Now notice that internal is also causing the trail side to supinate and externally rotate in the shoulder joint. Very nice. Okay, club path at 0, swing plane a little higher on that one, 58. Yep. Maybe just stood up a hair if I'm picky.
I probably feel that a little bit.
Okay. So one of the drills I like to do, very simple drill when we're working on this, is I'll take a second ball, and we're going to put this about 1.5 feet out in front of you, right here. And for good players, what we want to often try and do is separate face and path. Okay. So you notice that a lot of times your blocks, the path is right and the face is right. Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want your club path to go left of this ball. I want you to feel like the face stays on that ball, or even right of the ball. Yeah. Okay? So that's a nice visual image that this path of the club or the arc of the club is going left, but the face isn't going left. Does that make sense? Got it? Now you actually did it great.
Yeah, it felt like a good pass. I just missed the strike on it a little bit.
It's okay. But again, this kind of goes back to our last segment when we were working on that anti-hook drill. Is this tells you how much you rely on that dump or that
massively, isn't it?
overtaking.
It just shows you, like, we've taken
square
that
it
out a few times now with different things, and I can't do anything but hit it that way. How much I'm relying on
that timing.
motion.
So what needs to happen is a little bit more side bend, a little bit more rotation to get down to the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's eye-opening for me, to be honest, how much I'm reliant on that.
Right.
Because I've never hit so many thin and rightward shots.
Correct. Now, club path, though, you did great.
Yeah. I mean, club path is now in the swing plane's back down again from the previous one. So, like, everything we wanted it to do, it done. We just haven't
got the strike.
missing piece.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
This is kind of a little bit like a David Blaine, magic trick, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to do a lot of magic in a very short period of time. But it's great to get the explanations here.
Okay, so we're carrying that egg up to the top of our swing.
Yep.
Letting it out behind us as we come down, making sure we open up to get that path left, but keep the face to the right.
Correct. You got to move. You got to move quick. Better. Okay. So again, you see how this becomes very anti-hook.
Very.
Right?
Yeah.
Feels like you really can't go left right now, because when we look at the forces again to the golf club, this idea of pitching the shaft is not only causing its head to go this way, but technically there's a small amount of torque that's opening this face. Well, when I have torque in one direction, it makes it really hard to over torque in the other direction. And this is why most non-planar players, or let's say very shallow players on the forearm there, a lot of them have very strong grips hitting fades. Okay? The strong grip is just for you to get this started on line.
Absolutely.
Right? We're having a hard time getting the face to square up now.
Yeah.
But I'm not letting you do it by overtaking.
And that's where, guys, one of the main things, the reasons that technology is a huge pillar in the process of getting better is we're kind of using these. If we were in the range right now, we'd probably be guessing a little bit as to some of these values, and we'd be having a hard time knowing, because the shot isn't very good.
Right.
Are we being successful? Now we have a way of measuring right now. We're being very successful with what we're doing, and we can really be very specific about what we have to, which valve to turn on to improve the shot.
Yeah, and this is where, anecdotally, this is where a great coach will talk to the player and say, is this something that feels okay? Right? Even though we're hitting some poor shots here, in terms of contact quality, the numbers are exactly what we're looking for. But we have to have that anecdotal kind of comment that says, maybe this is something I can do, maybe this is something I can't do. And that's okay. And that's why we need to have multiple patterns available to teach people.
Without a doubt. And then for somebody who's never really had these pieces in my swing, being much more of a right path, more aggressive release from a steeper plane position.
Right.
This is everything I've never really had. So you're likely to see some sort of decrease in the quality of the shot for a little bit.
In terms of the strike, right, I agree. But, like you said, if we look at the numbers, or what we call our TrackMan imperatives a little bit more closely, we go, actually, this is a lot different than what I normally do. The one that, look at your dynamic line. Yeah. Right? We're going to flatten your golf clubs if you swung like this.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, my golf clubs, I used to play flat to take out left, but I would have horrible turf interaction. Then I just went, well, why don't you make them more upright, get better turf interaction, and just manage the left? Right. And now I'm...
You could do both, really. You could get the turf interaction and the flatter golf club, if you chose. Yeah. Right?
Okay. Square this thing
All right, let's do that one more time, but that was great. A little better strike.
Yeah, getting into the strike a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay, we got, interesting.
Okay.
So maybe didn't quite get that portion as much. I felt like it was good in the back. Maybe didn't quite get as much.
I agree with your synopsis, though. You definitely are very used to standing up, raising the handle a little bit. And definitely with these feels, they're going to feel like you're rotating a little bit more in what we call flexion. Yeah. A little bit less of early extension here. Again, that's why I want you to keep focusing on this.
I like that.
Trying to make that club go left of that ball.
I think it's a really good...
Like I want to scare you with this next one. Yeah. Okay.
That one I really love that there's a target for me to shoot.
Like a stencil, right? You're tracing the stencil. Now, notice how different your finish feels.
Yeah, that was the one.
Okay. Now, that's a great one to sort of finish on here in terms of what you did, right? We got swing plane to go from about 58 to 60. Yeah. to some of these good ones around 55, 56. So technically shallower, at least in terms of the sweet spot from knee height to knee height, okay? You can feel how that's incentivizing the pivot, okay? Because the flat spot is getting wider with the shallower swing plane, we see actually launch going up. In my opinion, in 20 years, we're gonna have more players swinging like this than we will planar. Because the speed and height advantages of shallowing that out and the inability to hit it left make it very attractive for top players who obviously don't want to hook it. Okay, so I do think there's going to see a change over time. We're going to see more swings like this. But this is kind of the physical, mechanical reasons why there may be some advantage to this. Now, right now, this might feel a little awkward. It goes against a lot of your built-in feels at the moment. And this would be a bit of a project if we tried to bring this through the whole year. But that's, in my opinion, a really good way of doing it, is focus on what the lead arm mechanics are doing, allow the trail arm to go with it, and now we start to see some of this shallowing pitch of the shaft.
I love that, because I think by doing, and it's like the focus of the other videos, by creating force rather than just trying to create a feel. Because I mean, I see so many people up, they'll make a swing and they'll go, and they'll try and kind of just like put it in there with the hands. But the likelihood of success when you go up there and then you throw on the speed, what's the likelihood that you're going to be patient enough to let that happen? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
100%.
Whereas, you know, we're creating an opposing force to make that happen with the lead arm.
Yeah, when you see, and that's why we have to be careful sometimes when we're measuring this stuff, whether it's on hack motion, whether it's, you know, looking at some of our more sophisticated units, and we start to look at what the wrists are doing, what the forearms are doing. Some of those forces are intentional. Some of those are resultant. And I would, like you, hopefully it's resultant. So when you see a player's wrist get pulled into flexion, when you see this forearm get pulled into supination, perhaps even a little bit of ulnar deviation, that is a response to the mass of the club and your arm starting in this position and going to this position. So as I rotate my body, this is causing my lead arm to then move internally, which is then causing my wrist angles to change. So because of that, I can use that, right? If I can do it consistently enough, right, I can get a lot of nice things to happen with that. Sequentially, it feels good. Again, there's some advantages perhaps down at the golf ball, the wider, shallower arc at the ball, especially with, let's say, 5-iron through driver, probably a pretty good thing to do.
For stabilizing that club face on,
absolutely,
you say that wider sort of,
you know, absolutely. So it's definitely an option. Definitely not for everybody, right? We said we've got Adam Scott or you know, Scotty Scheffler, obviously wonderful, wonderful players who don't shallow it.
It's not the only way to play good golf.
No, absolutely. It's just that what we're relying on is those players have to rely on the overtaking of the shaft. In this particular case, when we put the sweet spot more perpendicular to the spine, we have a little bit less overtaking, a little bit more, let's say, a pivot-driven golf swing.
Love that. Guys, hopefully that clears up a lot of the technical elements about a very, very popular topic that I guarantee the people who watch us, they'll know about this and they'll have heard about it. I just don't know if they truly understand it.
It's tough, and like again, there's no right way to do anything in golf, right? We see that every week on the PGA Tour. All these players are wonderful players, hit a lot of great golf shots. We have options. I love that. You know, it's an attraction to the sport that not everybody has to do it the same.
Sure.
And there are advantages and maybe disadvantages to each one of those ideas.
Well, I think this is one of the topics, aesthetically pleasing golf swings versus highly optimizing and functional golf swings, is something we're going to dive into with Scott on our longer form podcast that we're going to do with him. So if you've watched this video and are keen to hear more thoughts in maybe a longer form fashion, the podcast is where you're going to find it. So whether you're just a golfer who wants to improve their own golf swing and further their own knowledge, whether you're an assistant pro, whether you're an established, you know, club fitter or golf professional teacher, this is going to be stuff that you can put into your own toolbox. All stuff that can be taken with you in your journey. It's just adding more and more to your own repertoire.
Absolutely.
All right, pal. Thank you again.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it, Cowxy. Guys, really privileged to have Scott join us on the channel. part of the community, and it's ultimately for your benefit. So let us know in the comments below, what would you like us to do more of in this sort of instructional sense? One of the pillars that we talk about often is biomechanics. It's really been the main pillar we've focused on since we've launched the brand new channel. And this is us truly being authentic to the biomechanics and the importance of having them in place to play the absolute best golf you can. So we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments below. If you haven't and don't subscribe, subscribe. All right, hit the notifications, make sure you know when the videos come out. Every Monday, every Friday, podcast on a Wednesday, you know where to find us. Stay tuned for more. We'll see you again soon.